The rain came down in sheets that night, turning the Minneapolis streets into rivers of gray water that reflected nothing but despair. Maya Richardson huddled beneath the broken awning of an abandoned storefront, her 2 children pressed against her sides like frightened birds, seeking shelter from a storm that had lasted far longer than a single evening. It had lasted 3 months, ever since the eviction notice became final, ever since her savings ran dry, ever since the world decided that a single mother working 2 jobs still wasn't enough to deserve a roof over her head. Destiny, her 7-year-old daughter, shivered despite the extra sweater Maya had wrapped around her thin shoulders. Marcus, only 5, had stopped asking when they could go home. He had learned, as children in impossible situations learn too quickly, that some questions only made his mother's eyes fill with a pain that was worse than hunger. Maya pulled them closer, feeling the dampness seep through her jacket, the cold biting at her bones with teeth that grew sharper each night. She had tried everything. The shelters were full, always full, with waiting lists that stretched into months. The churches offered meals, but no beds. The social services offices handed her forms that required addresses she didn't have, references from landlords who had turned their backs, pay stubs from jobs she'd lost because missing work to care for sick children without childcare was apparently a luxury she couldn't afford. 3 months of sleeping in her car until it was repossessed. 3 months of washing in gas station bathrooms. 3 months of watching her children's faces grow thinner, their eyes grow dimmer, their laughter fade into a memory of what childhood was supposed to sound like. "Mama, I'm cold," Destiny whispered, her voice so small it almost disappeared into the sound of the rain. "I know, baby. I know." Maya's voice cracked. She had no comfort left to offer, no promises that wouldn't be lies. The money in her pocket, $17.38, was all that stood between them and absolute nothing. $17 couldn't buy tomorrow. It couldn't buy hope. A man in an expensive coat hurried past, his umbrella a perfect shield against the storm. He glanced at them briefly, his eyes sliding away as if poverty were contagious, as if acknowledging their existence might somehow make him responsible for their suffering. Maya had stopped expecting kindness from strangers. The world was full of people who would rather step over the broken than stop to help them stand. But as she sat there in the rain, her children's fragile bodies trembling against her own, Maya made a decision. She would not let them sleep in the cold tonight. She would not watch hypothermia steal the warmth from their skin. If the system had abandoned them, if society had decided they were disposable, then she would find shelter the only way she knew how. She would break the rules. 6 blocks away, hidden behind a rusted chain-link fence overgrown with dead vines, stood a building that had once been something magnificent. The neighbors called it the Purple Palace, though most had forgotten why. It had been boarded up for years, windows covered with plywood, doors sealed with chains that had oxidized into brown sculptures of neglect. The property had changed hands through bankruptcy proceedings, legal disputes, and the kind of complicated estate battles that left buildings trapped in limbo while lawyers argued over who had the right to let them rot. Maya had passed it before, on better days when she still had a car and drove these streets looking for work. She remembered thinking it looked haunted, abandoned, the kind of place that held secrets the way graveyards held bones. But tonight, in the rain, with her children shaking and her options reduced to none, it looked like salvation. She gathered Marcus and Destiny, whispering that they were going on an adventure. Children believe in adventures when they have no choice, when pretending is the only way to survive what's real. They walked through the rain, staying close to buildings, avoiding the streetlights that might draw attention to a homeless mother and 2 children who looked like they'd already lost everything. The fence around the property had gaps where time and rust had eaten through the metal. Maya found one, pulled it wider, and helped her children through. The yard was a jungle of overgrown grass and fallen branches, but they made their way to a side entrance where the boards had rotted enough to create a space just wide enough for a desperate woman to pry open. Inside, the darkness was absolute. Maya clicked on the small flashlight she bought from a dollar store back when she still believed in planning ahead. The beam cut through dust so thick it hung in the air like fog. They were in what had once been a hallway, walls lined with purple velvet that had faded to the color of old bruises. The carpet beneath their feet, once plush and expensive, now squelched with moisture and decay. "Mama, it smells funny," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the emptiness. It's just old, baby. Old buildings always smell funny. Maya tried to sound confident, but her own heart was hammering against her ribs. Every instinct screamed that they shouldn't be here, that they were trespassing on something that didn't want to be disturbed. But cold and fear were enemies that fought each other, and tonight cold was winning. They moved deeper into the building, Maya's flashlight revealing glimpses of what this place had been. Gold records lined some walls, their frames covered in dust but still gleaming faintly in the weak light. Photographs of musicians, their faces young and full of dreams that had either come true or shattered against the rocks of reality. A grand staircase swept upward into darkness, its railing carved with symbols that looked almost mystical. "Stay close," Maya whispered. She found a room that might have been a lounge once, with furniture still intact beneath drop cloths that had turned gray with age. She pulled the cloths away, revealing couches that were water-stained but dry, and for the first time in 3 months, her children had something soft to lie on. "We're spending the night here?" Destiny asked, her eyes wide in the dim light. "Just for tonight," Maya lied. She had no idea where they would go tomorrow, but mothers lie to their children when truth is a blade too sharp for small hands to hold. "Just until the rain stops." She tucked them onto the couches, covering them with the cleaner drop cloths, and sat on the floor between them, one hand on each child, feeling their breathing slow as exhaustion dragged them into sleep. Only then did Maya let herself cry, silently, the tears mixing with rain water that still dripped from her hair. She had been a good mother. She had worked hard, paid her bills, followed every rule society demanded. And still, the world had discarded her like trash. 3 months ago, she'd had an apartment, a job, a life that made sense. Now she was breaking into abandoned buildings, stealing shelter like a criminal, because the system built to help people like her had 1,000 hoops to jump through, and she tripped on the first one. The building groaned around them, old with settling, pipes creaking with phantom water that no longer flowed. Maya listened to every sound, ready to grab her children and run if danger presented itself. But the only danger here was the one she'd brought with her, the danger of hope dying in a woman's chest while her children slept and dreamed of better days. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean of nothing. Morning came with pale gray light filtering through cracks in the boarded windows, turning the room into a cathedral of shadows and dust. Maya woke with her back against the couch, her neck stiff from sleeping upright, and for one blessed moment, she forgot where they were. Then reality crashed back like a wave she couldn't outrun. Marcus and Destiny still slept, their faces peaceful in a way that made Maya's chest ache. She stood carefully, joints protesting, and looked around the room properly for the first time. In daylight, dim as it was, she could see details she'd missed in the darkness. This hadn't been just any building. The gold records on the walls bore names she recognized, artists who dominated the charts decades ago. A platinum disc caught her attention, its inscription partially visible through the grime. She stepped closer, squinting to read it. Studio Sessions, 1987. The purple one. Maya's breath caught. The purple one. That's what people had called Prince, Minneapolis's most famous son, the musical genius who turned this city into his kingdom. She looked around with new eyes, understanding flooding through her. This was his building. This abandoned, rotting structure had once been a temple of creativity where one of the greatest artists in history had made magic. She walked to the window, peering through gaps in the boards at the overgrown yard outside. How had something so important been left to decay? How did a place touched by greatness become a tomb? Behind her, Destiny stirred. "Mama, I'm here, baby." Maya returned to her daughter's side, smoothing hair away from her forehead. "How did you sleep?" "Better than the car." Destiny's honesty was a knife. Children shouldn't have to compare sleeping in abandoned buildings favorably to anything. Marcus woke next, and Maya used the last of their bottled water to wet a cloth and clean their faces. She had granola bars in her backpack, stale and generic, but her children ate them like they were feast. $17 couldn't buy breakfast at a diner, but it could buy more granola bars, more water, maybe a cheap blanket. "Can we stay here?" Marcus asked, his mouth full of oats and artificial sweetener. Maya started to say no, started to explain that they couldn't live in an abandoned building, that they'd find a shelter bed, that something would work out. but the words dried up in her throat. Because why not? The building was abandoned, forgotten. No one would look for them here. It had a roof, walls, furniture. It was more than they'd had in 3 months. Maybe for a few days, she heard herself say. Until Mama figures things out. Destiny's face lit up with something Maya hadn't seen in months. Hope, real and fragile and heartbreaking. Really? Really? But we have to be careful. We can't let anyone know we're here. Maya's mind was already working through the logistics, the dangers, the possibilities. Squatting was illegal, but so was letting her children freeze to death. Sometimes you chose between wrong and wronger. After the children finished eating, Maya decided to explore more of the building. If they were going to stay, even temporarily, she needed to know what they were dealing with. Structural damage, other squatters, anything that could put her children in danger. She left Destiny and Marcus in the lounge, making them promise not to leave the room, and ventured deeper into the building. The hallway branched into multiple directions, each leading to rooms that told stories of the building's past. A kitchen with commercial appliances covered in rust. A bathroom with marble fixtures and mirrors so clouded they reflected nothing but ghosts. A recording studio with soundproofing on the walls and equipment that had been stripped away, leaving only mounting holes and disconnected cables. She climbed the grand staircase, each step protesting under her weight. The second floor opened into a massive space that might have been a ballroom or performance hall. Purple drapes hung in tatters from ceiling-high windows. A stage dominated one end, its wood warped but still solid. She could almost hear the music that must have filled the space once, before time and abandonment silenced it forever. But it was the third floor that stopped her cold. At the end of another hallway, she found a door different from the others. Where everything else in the building showed obvious decay, this door looked maintained. The wood was solid, the frame intact, and most telling, a keypad lock beside the handle, its digital display still faintly glowing. Maya's heart began to pound. Power. The building had power at least to this door, which meant someone was still paying electricity bills, still maintaining something behind this sealed entrance. She tried the handle, expecting it locked. It turned. The door opened onto darkness, so complete her flashlight seemed to dim, just trying to penetrate it. She stepped inside, and motion sensors triggered overhead lights that flickered to life, revealing a room that didn't belong in this abandoned building, didn't belong in this decade. The space was enormous, walls lined with soundproofing that looked fresh, floor covered in carpet that still held its rich purple color. But it was what filled the room that made Maya forget to breathe. Instruments. Dozens of them. Guitars mounted on walls and glass cases, each one clearly expensive, clearly custom. A piano, white and gleaming, sat in the center like an altar. Synthesizers and mixing boards covered one entire wall, their screens dark but their surfaces clean, as if someone had dusted them recently. And everywhere, purple. Purple lighting fixtures, purple furniture, purple accents on every instrument. This wasn't just a room. It was a shrine. Maya moved deeper, her footsteps silent on the thick carpet. She recognized some of the guitars from photographs she'd seen, iconic instruments played in concerts that had defined generations. How were they still here? Why hadn't they been auctioned off? Sold, placed in museums. At the far end of the room, she found something that made her stop walking entirely. A massive mixing console, the kind that belonged in professional recording studios, stood before a glass window that looked into a recording booth. And beside it, built into the wall, was something that shouldn't exist in an abandoned building. A vault door. Not a safe, not a lockbox, but a full vault door, the kind banks used to protect their most valuable assets. Polished steel, combination lock, and a biometric scanner that glowed softly in the dim light. Maya's hands trembled as she reached toward it. What would require this level of security? What could be so valuable it needed a vault in a recording studio? She tried the handle, knowing it would be locked. It turned. The vault had been left open, or had been unlocked recently, or had failed in some way that allowed access. Maya pulled the heavy door, its hinges silent and well-oiled despite the building's decay. It swung open, revealing a smaller room beyond, perhaps 10 feet square. She shined her flashlight inside, and her breath stopped completely. The vault was filled with storage containers, each one labeled with dates and descriptions in careful handwriting. She pulled one toward her, popping the latches and lifting the lid. Inside, nestled in custom foam, lay a purple guitar pick. Just a pick, small and seemingly insignificant. But beneath it, in the container's bottom, was a certificate of authenticity and a sales estimate from a major auction house. Estimated value for sale at auction, $250,000. Maya's hands shook so badly, she nearly dropped the container. $250,000 for a guitar pick? She set it down carefully and opened the next container. A handwritten lyric sheet, the paper yellowed but the ink still clear. Words that had become one of Prince's most famous songs, written in his own hand. The estimate beneath it, $1 million. The next container held a jacket, purple leather with gold studs, worn in countless performances. $3 million. Maya backed away from the vault, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. She opened container after container, each one revealing treasures that shouldn't exist, shouldn't be here, abandoned and forgotten in a building rotting from the inside out. Stage costumes, handwritten notes, unreleased recordings on master tapes, jewelry worn in music videos, and each single item, worth more money than Maya had earned in her entire life. The final container, the largest one at the back of the vault, was locked with a combination that she shouldn't have been able to guess. But the numbers were written on a piece of tape stuck to the side, faded but readable. She dialed them in, and the lock clicked open. Inside was documentation, legal papers, authentication certificates, and a full inventory list of everything in the vault. Maya's hands shook as she read through it, her eyes catching on numbers that grew larger and more impossible with each line. Total estimated value of collection if sold at auction, the document concluded, $295 million. Maya sat down hard on the vault floor, her legs no longer willing to support her. $295 million. In instruments and costumes and memories of a dead genius. Locked in a vault in an abandoned building where a homeless woman with 2 children had broken in to escape the rain. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to scream. She wanted to close the vault and pretend she'd never seen any of this, because surely this was the kind of discovery that destroyed people, that brought attention no squatter could survive. But she was a mother before she was anything else, and mothers did mathematics differently than other people. $295 million divided by 3 was enough to give her children lives. Real lives. Education and health care and homes that didn't have wheels or rod or chains on the doors. Her mind raced. This collection belonged to someone, Prince's estate, his family, whoever had inherited his legacy. They would be looking for it, or had looked for it and given up, or didn't know it existed. The building had been tied up in legal disputes for years. Perhaps in the chaos of estate settlements and bankruptcy proceedings, this room had been forgotten. Or perhaps someone knew exactly where it was and had chosen to let it remain hidden, waiting for the legal battles to settle before revealing its existence. Either way, Maya had found it. A homeless mother with $17 in her pocket had stumbled into enough wealth to solve every problem in her life, and the lives of 100 other families just like hers. She stood slowly, her decision already made before she fully realized she was making it. This wasn't theft. This was survival. And if the world wanted to call her a criminal for taking what she needed to keep her children alive, then let it. She'd been called worse by people who'd done less to help her. But she couldn't just load guitars into a shopping cart and walk away. This required planning, care, and most importantly, proof. Proof that these items were authentic, proof of their value, proof that she'd found them rather than stolen them from some legitimate collection. Maya pulled out her phone, its battery at 15%, and began taking photographs. Every container, every certificate, every estimate. The vault door with its combination lock. The studio with its perfect preservation. The building's exterior with its address visible. Evidence that she'd found something impossible in a place that shouldn't exist. When her phone's memory filled up, she used her email to send the photos to herself, creating a backup that couldn't be destroyed if something happened to the phone. Her mind worked through possibilities, dangers, opportunities. She would need a lawyer, someone who specialized in found property, estates authentication. She would need to come forward carefully, claiming she discovered the collection while seeking shelter, which was true. She would need to establish her rights to a finder's fee, standard in cases where lost property was recovered and returned to owners. Even a small percentage of $295 million would change her life forever. But first, she needed to secure this room, document everything, and most importantly, protect her children from whatever storm was about to break over their heads. Because finding treasure didn't mean keeping it. It meant surviving the fight over who it belonged to. Maya left the vault, pulling the door closed behind her but not locking it. She couldn't risk needing to get back in and being unable to. She returned to the main studio, looking at the instruments with new eyes. Each one was a piece of history, yes, but also a piece of currency. A way out of poverty, a chance at redemption. She thought about the man in the expensive coat who'd walked past her in the rain, his eyes sliding away as if she didn't exist. She thought about the social workers who'd handed her forms she couldn't fill out. She thought about the landlord who'd evicted her despite her pleas, despite her children's tears. They had all decided she was worthless. The world had weighed her and found her lacking. But she had found something they'd all overlooked. She had found value in abandonment, treasure in decay, hope in a place everyone else had written off as lost. Maya turned off the lights and left the studio, closing the door behind her. She descended the grand staircase with purpose in her step, returned to the lounge where her children waited, and knelt before them with tears in her eyes. "Babies," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "Mama found something. Something that's going to change our lives." Destiny looked at her with those two old eyes that had learned not to trust promises. "What did you find?" Maya pulled them both into her arms, holding them tight against her chest. "Hope," she whispered. "I found hope." Outside, the rain had stopped, and pale sunlight struggled to break through the clouds. The building groaned around them, settling into itself like it knew secrets were about to be spoken, that silence was about to end. And in that moment, in that abandoned palace of purple dreams, a homeless mother made a choice that would echo through courtrooms and headlines in history. She chose not to walk away. She chose not to stay silent. She chose to fight for what she'd found, for what her children deserved. She chose herself. The discovery sat heavy in Maya's chest, a weight that was both burden and blessing. She spent the rest of that day in a daze, moving through the building with Destiny and Marcus, showing them rooms, but keeping the vault secret for now. Children couldn't keep secrets, not when hunger or fear made them speak, and Maya needed time to plan before anyone else knew what she'd found. But planning required resources she didn't have, a phone with barely any battery, no computer, no internet except the weak public Wi-Fi she could catch if she walked 6 blocks to the library, and most pressing, no way to feed her children beyond the $17 that would buy maybe 2 more meals if she stretched it thin enough. That evening, as they ate granola bars and shared a bottle of water, Maya made another decision. She would trust someone, not with everything, not yet, but with enough to get help. She thought through everyone she'd known before homelessness had swallowed her life. Co-workers from the restaurant where she'd waited tables had disappeared when her shifts became unreliable. Friends from better days had stopped returning calls when she started asking for small loans she could never repay. Family was a word that meant disappointment and distance in her life, had been since she was younger than Destiny was now. But there was one person who might help. Ramona, a lawyer who did pro bono work at the homeless shelter downtown. Maya had met her briefly months ago when she'd first tried to get help. Ramona had given her a card, told her to call if she ever needed legal advice. Maya had lost the card, but she remembered the name of the firm. Morris and Associates, downtown, 14th floor. The next morning, Maya told the children they were going on another adventure. She washed their faces with bottled water, smoothed their hair as best she could, and tried to make them look like children who belonged to a mother who had her life together. It was a lie their appearance wouldn't support for long, but it was the best she could do. They walked 12 blocks to the library, where Maya used the public computers to find the firm's address and phone number. She didn't call. Phone calls were too easy to dismiss. Instead, she memorized the address and walked another 8 blocks with her children in tow, their small hands gripping hers as they navigated sidewalks filled with people who had places to go and futures that looked like something other than gray. Morris and Associates occupied an entire floor of a glass and steel building that looked like it cost more than Maya's entire life. The lobby was marble and chrome. The security guard behind the desk wore a suit nicer than anything Maya had owned even in her best days. She hesitated at the entrance, feeling the weight of her appearance, the smell of abandoned buildings that clung to her clothes, the visible poverty that marked her as someone who didn't belong. But Destiny's hand squeezed hers, and Maya remembered why she was here. For them. Always for them. She walked to the security desk with as much confidence as she could manufacture. The guard looked up, his expression shifting through several emotions before settling on professional courtesy, undercut with suspicion. "Can I help you? I need to see Ramona Chin." She gave me her card. "It's urgent." Maya's voice was steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but Miss Chen doesn't see walk-ins." The guard's tone made it clear that especially didn't include homeless women with children in tow. Maya leaned forward, lowering her voice so her children wouldn't hear. "Tell her it's about a legal discovery related to Prince's estate. Tell her there's a $295 million collection that's been missing. Tell her I found it." The guard's eyebrows rose. For a moment, Maya saw him weighing whether she was delusional or desperate or telling an impossible truth. Then he picked up the phone and made a call, turning away so she couldn't hear the conversation. When he turned back, his expression had changed. Not to respect, but to uncertainty, which was better than dismissal. 14th floor. Someone will meet you at the elevator. The elevator ride was the longest 60 seconds of Maya's life. Marcus pressed against her leg, overwhelmed by the building's size and shine. Destiny stared at her reflection in the polished doors, barely recognizing the girl looking back. When the doors opened, a young man in an expensive suit waited for them. His eyes widened slightly at their appearance, but he extended his hand professionally. "I'm James, Miss Chen's paralegal. She's asked me to bring you to a conference room." They followed him through a maze of glass-walled offices and cubicles where people worked on computers and spoke in low voices about contracts and depositions and things Maya's life had never touched. The conference room was all windows and white furniture, a view of the city spreading out below like a promise. "Miss Chen will be right with you. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" James's politeness was real, Maya thought, not the kind that masked contempt. "Water would be good. And maybe, if it's not too much trouble, do you have any snacks? For the kids." Maya hated asking, hated the way it exposed her need, but her children's hunger mattered more than her pride. "Of course." James left, and Maya settled her children in chairs too big for their small bodies. "Is this where you're going to work now, Mama?" Marcus asked, his eyes wide with hope. "Maybe, baby. Let's see what happens." Maya smoothed his hair, wishing she could promise him certainties instead of maybes. James returned with bottles of water and a plate of cookies that looked like they'd been baked for a client meeting. Maya let the children eat while she waited, her mind rehearsing what she would say, how she would explain that she'd broken into an abandoned building and found treasure. When the door opened again, Ramona Chen entered with the kind of presence that commanded rooms. She was younger than Maya expected, maybe early 40s, with silver streaking through her black hair and eyes that assessed everything in seconds. She carried a legal pad and wore a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Maya's old rent. "Maya Richardson." Ramona's voice was steady, giving nothing away. She sat across from Maya and folded her hands on the table. "My assistant says you're making extraordinary claims about Prince's estate." "I found something," Maya said simply. "Something that's been missing. And you broke into a building to find it." Ramona's tone wasn't accusatory, just stating fact. Maya met her eyes directly. "I broke into a building to find shelter for my children. What I found there was something else entirely." "Tell me." So Maya did. She explained the rain, the abandoned building, the decision to squat. She described the studio, the vault, the inventory. She pulled out her phone and showed Ramona the photographs, watching the lawyer's expression shift from skepticism to attention to something that looked like shock. Ramona studied each photograph carefully, zooming in on the authentication certificates, the inventory list, the vault door. When she looked up, her expression was unreadable. "This building, you're certain it's been abandoned? The windows are boarded up. The utilities are cut except for some emergency power. The property's been in legal disputes for years. And you just happened to find an unlocked vault containing hundreds of millions in assets." The studio door was unlocked. The vault was open. I don't know why, But I documented everything before I touched anything. Maya's voice was firm. She had nothing to apologize for. Ramona set the phone down and looked at Maya with an expression that might have been respect. Do you know what you've stumbled into? Trouble. A legal nightmare. But also, possibly, the discovery of the decade. Ramona leaned back in her chair, thinking. Prince's estate has been contested for years. Multiple claims, disputes over. Authenticity, accusations of missing assets. This collection, if it's real, if it's legally part of the estate, changes everything. What about me? Maya asked quietly. What about my children? Ramona's eyes moved to Destiny and Marcus, who had finished the cookies, and were now looking at the city below with expressions that belonged on children who'd never had enough. When Ramona spoke again, her voice was softer. Minnesota, law provides for finder's fees in cases where lost or abandoned property is recovered and returned to its rightful owner. The percentage varies, but in a case like this, with property of this value, you could be entitled to between 5 and 10%. Maya's mind did the math quickly. 5% of $295 million was nearly $15 million. 10% was almost $30 million. Numbers so large they stopped meaning anything except freedom. But, Ramona continued, you'll face challenges. The estate will argue you were trespassing. Some will claim you were looting. The media will tear you apart. Homeless woman steals from Prince's legacy. You'll need protection, legal representation, and you'll need to be prepared for a fight that could last years. I've been fighting for years, Maya said quietly. At least this time I'll be fighting for something, instead of just against everything. Ramona studied her for a long moment. Then she picked up Maya's phone and began scrolling through the photos again. I'll need to verify these before I can agree to represent you. But if they're authentic, I'll take your case. Pro bono initially, with the understanding that my fee comes from your eventual finder's compensation. Why? Maya asked. Why help me? Ramona looked at the children again, and something in her expression shifted. Because 20 years ago I was you. Different circumstances, same desperation. Someone helped me when they didn't have to. Maybe it's time I pay that forward. She stood, extending her hand. Maya shook it, feeling the strength in the lawyer's grip, the promise of an ally in a fight she couldn't win alone. First things first, Ramona said. We need to secure that building, document everything properly, and get you and your children somewhere safe. The court will look more favorably on your claim if you're not actively squatting in the property where you found the assets. I can't afford rent. I have a guest apartment above my garage. It's small, but it's clean and safe. You and the kids can stay there while we sort this out. Ramona's tone made it clear this wasn't charity, it was strategy. You'll need a stable address for the legal proceedings anyway. Maya felt tears pressing behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of someone who was seeing her as a person rather than a problem for the first time in months. Thank you. Thank me when we win. Ramona gathered her legal pad and phone. I'll have my assistant prepare the guest apartment. In the meantime, I need you to write down everything you remember about the building, the vault, what you touched, what you moved. Every detail matters. Over the next several hours, Maya did exactly that. She filled pages with descriptions while Destiny and Marcus were entertained by James, who set them up with coloring books and a tablet playing children's shows. When Maya's hand cramped from writing, she switched to dictating into Ramona's recording device. By the time the sun began setting, painting the city in colors that reminded Maya of the purple that dominated the studio, she had given Ramona everything. Every memory, every detail, every photograph. Tomorrow, Ramona said, we go to the building together. I'll bring an authentication expert, a photographer, and a security team. We document everything properly, secure the premises, and then we notify the estate. We do this right, by the book, so there's no question about your intentions. And if they try to take it all, if they say I'm lying or stealing, then we fight. Ramona's smile was sharp, predatory in a way that made Maya feel safe for the first time in months. I'm very good at fighting. That night, Maya and her children slept in the guest apartment above Ramona's garage. It was small as promised, but it had a bed with clean sheets, a bathroom with hot water, and a kitchen with food in the refrigerator. Destiny and Marcus fell asleep within minutes, their bodies finally able to relax in a space that was safe and warm and real. Maya stood at the window, looking out at the city lights, and let herself cry. Not from sadness anymore, but from relief so powerful it felt like drowning in reverse, being pulled up from depths she thought would swallow her forever. She had found something impossible. She had found hope in the last place anyone would look for it, in an abandoned building where dreams had died, but one man's legacy had survived. Tomorrow would bring challenges, fights, people who would try to take what she'd found or claim she didn't deserve it. But tonight, her children slept in a bed. Tonight, she had an ally. Tonight, she had a chance. And sometimes, for a mother who'd been living on the edge of nothing, a chance was worth more than any treasure. The morning arrived with autumn sunlight that turned the city gold. Maya woke before her children, a habit from months of sleeping in dangerous places where dawn meant she needed to move before someone noticed them. But today she woke to safety, to walls that didn't rot, and a roof that didn't leak. She made coffee in Ramona's guest kitchen, her hands wrapped around the mug like it was something precious. Through the window, she watched the neighborhood wake up, people emerging from homes they'd slept in last night and would return to tonight, taking for granted a security she'd learned never to assume. Destiny appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama, are we really staying here? For now, baby." Maya pulled her daughter into her lap, breathing in the scent of her hair, clean for the first time in weeks, thanks to the shower they'd taken last night. "Maybe for a while. I like it here." Destiny's voice was small, afraid to hope too loudly. "It smells good, like flowers instead of outside." Marcus emerged next, and Maya made them breakfast from the groceries Ramona had stocked. Cereal with fresh milk, toast with real butter, orange juice that didn't come from a powder. They ate quietly, reverently, as if afraid that speaking would break whatever spell had transported them from the street to this impossible comfort. Ramona arrived at 9, dressed in jeans and a blazer, professional but prepared for the dirty work ahead. Behind her came 3 others, a woman with expensive cameras around her neck, a man carrying aluminum cases of equipment, and another man wearing a suit that screamed security detail. "Maya, this is Claire, my photographer. David, our authentication expert. And Marcus, security." Ramona's introductions were brisk, efficient. Everyone signed non-disclosure agreements. "Whatever we find today stays confidential until we decide how to proceed." They drove to the building in 2 cars, Marcus the security guard in one with the equipment, Maya and her children with Ramona, and the others in the second. As they approached the property, Maya's stomach tightened with a fear she hadn't anticipated. What if she'd dreamed it? What if the vault had been empty, or the photographs had been false memories conjured by a desperate mind? What if she'd brought all these people here only to expose herself as delusional, a homeless woman, so broken by poverty that she'd invented treasure where none existed? But when they pulled up to the fence, the building stood exactly as she remembered. Ramona studied it thoughtfully, taking in the boarded windows, the overgrown yard, the aura of abandonment. "This is it. This is it." Maya's voice was steady, but her hands shook. They entered through the same gap in the fence Maya had used. Inside, dust still hung in the air like it had been waiting for their return. The purple hallways, the gold records, the grand staircase, all of it remained exactly as she'd left it. Claire began photographing immediately, documenting the building's condition, the evidence of its abandonment. David moved through the rooms with a different attention, studying the details that would prove provenance and timeline. On the 3rd floor, they reached the studio door. It was still unlocked, still waiting. Maya's heart hammered as she pushed it open, and the motion sensors triggered the lights. The gas behind her told her everything she needed to know. It was real. Other people could see it too. "Jesus Christ," Claire whispered, her camera already firing off shots. "This is real." David moved to the nearest guitar case with the reverence of someone approaching a holy relic. He examined the instrument without touching it, then turned to Ramona with an expression that mixed shock with professional excitement. "This is a cloud guitar, one of only a few prints designed himself. If it's authentic, which the craftsmanship suggests, this single instrument is worth 10 to 15 million alone." The vault door stood as Maya had left it, partially open, inviting and terrifying. David approached it like a man walking toward his own execution. aware he was about to cross a threshold that would change everything. He stepped inside, and for a long moment, silence filled the studio. Then he emerged, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. "Ramona, you need to see this." They all entered the vault together, except for Marcus, who stayed with Destiny, and Marcus in the main studio. Claire's camera documented everything while David opened container after container with gloved hands, examining each item with growing disbelief. "Handwritten lyrics to Purple Rain," he murmured, holding a sheet of paper up to the light. "This alone, authenticated, would sell for $2 million minimum." He set it down carefully and moved to the next container. Stage costume from the 1999 tour. Custom jewelry. Unreleased master recordings. His voice kept rising with each discovery. "This isn't a collection. This is history." Ramona stood in the center of the vault, turning slowly to take in every container, every label, every piece of a dead man's legacy. When she looked at Maya, her expression was unreadable. "You found this exactly as it is now? You didn't remove anything? Didn't disturb the arrangement? I opened containers to see what was inside. I took photographs, but I didn't take anything." Maya's voice was firm. She had nothing to be ashamed of. "Good." Ramona pulled out her phone and began making calls. "I need to start the legal process now. Before word gets out, before people start claiming ownership or accusing you of theft." Over the next several hours, the studio became a hive of controlled chaos. Claire photographed every inch of the vault and studio from multiple angles. David cataloged each item, comparing serial numbers and details against databases of Prince's known possessions. Ramona made call after call, speaking in legal language Maya only partially understood. Marcus, the security guard, secured the building's entrances and installed temporary cameras to monitor access. "You'll need to file for emergency protective custody of the property," he told Ramona. "Someone else might have known about this. They might come looking." Maya sat with her children in the main studio, watching the professionals work. Destiny had found a chair and was drawing on paper Claire had given her. Marcus played with a small toy someone had packed in one of the equipment cases. They were quiet, well-behaved, invisible in the way homeless children learn to make themselves. But Maya saw them differently now. She saw them as children who might have futures, who might get to be something other than shadows in other people's lives. "Mrs. Richardson." David approached her with a tablet showing numbers and estimates. "I've completed a preliminary assessment. Based on market comparisons and recent auction results for similar items, the total collection value is actually higher than the original estimate you found." "Higher?" Maya's voice cracked. $342 million. Give or take $20 million depending on buyer interest. David's expression was serious. "This is the most significant discovery of Prince memorabilia in history. When this becomes public, which it will, it's going to be chaos." Maya looked at her children, then at the vault behind David, then back at her children. $342 million. Even 5% was more money than she could comprehend. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Ramona said, joining them, "we file a legal claim. Tomorrow morning, I'm submitting emergency documents to the court declaring you the finder of abandoned property. I'm also filing for protective custody of the collection to prevent it from being damaged or stolen. And I'm notifying the estate's legal representatives that we've located assets they've been missing. They're going to fight me. It wasn't a question. They're going to fight like hell." Ramona's smile was grim. "The estate is worth hundreds of millions. Adding another $342 million changes the distribution to all the heirs. Some will welcome it. Others will claim you're lying, stealing, fabricating. The public will take sides. The media will tear into your life, your history, your homelessness. I can handle it." Maya's voice was steady. "Can they?" Ramona nodded toward Destiny and Marcus. Maya looked at her children, so small, so fragile, so completely dependent on her to protect them from a world that had shown no mercy. Could they handle the spotlight? Could they survive the scrutiny, the accusations, the hatred that would come from people who believe she was trying to steal from a dead legend? "They'll have to," Maya said quietly, "because the alternative is going back to the streets. And I won't do that to them again. I'd rather fight the world than watch my babies freeze." Ramona studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay. Then we fight. But we fight smart. No media interviews until we're ready. No social media. You don't talk to anyone about this except through me. We control the narrative as much as possible. I don't have social media. I don't even have a working phone plan. Good. Let's keep it that way. Ramona turned to the others. Let's finish documentation and secure this place. Tomorrow everything changes. They worked until sunset, painted the studio in purple light that seemed symbolic, a blessing from the building itself. When they finally left, Maya took one last look at the vault, at the containers holding a dead man's dreams and a desperate woman's hope. She had broken into this building seeking shelter. She was leaving it with something far more dangerous than treasure. She was leaving it with a future that had to be fought for. The legal filing hit the court system like a grenade at 9 a.m. the next morning. Ramona had prepared the documents with surgical precision, a finder's claim under Minnesota statute, emergency protective custody petition for the collection, and formal notification to all parties involved in Prince's ongoing estate litigation. By noon, Maya's phone, which Ramona had finally gotten reconnected, was ringing constantly. Numbers she didn't recognize. Area codes from across the country. She didn't answer any of them, following Ramona's instructions explicitly. By 3 p.m., the first news article appeared online. Local woman claims to have found missing Prince collection. The article was tentative, carefully worded to avoid libel, but it named Maya and included a photograph someone had taken of her outside Ramona's office days earlier. By evening, the story had gone national. Maya sat in Ramona's guest apartment, her children asleep in the bedroom while she scrolled through article after article on the laptop Ramona had loaned her. The comment sections were brutal. She's lying. Probably stole it and is trying to legalize the theft. Another scammer looking for a payday from a dead man's legacy. Homeless people don't just find millions in treasure. This is fraud. But mixed with the hatred were other voices. If she found it, she deserves compensation. That's the law. The estate has been fighting over missing assets for years. Maybe she really did find them. Single mother trying to survive. The system failed her. Good for her for fighting back. Maya closed the laptop when the comments started to blur together. She walked to the window and stared out at the darkness, wondering what tomorrow would bring. The answer came at 6 a.m. with a knock on the door. Ramona stood there with newspapers in her hand, her expression grim. We're front-page news. The headline was bigger than Maya expected. Homeless mother's $342 million discovery. The photo showed her, gaunt and desperate-looking, taken from her social services file somehow. The article was more balanced than the online versions, including quotes from Ramona and acknowledgement that the legal process was just beginning. But it was the follow-up articles that worried Ramona. 3 different members of Prince's extended family had given interviews claiming Maya was a fraud. 2 lawyers representing estate beneficiaries had filed counterclaims arguing that anyone squatting in the building had no rights to finder's fees. A prominent music historian had written an op-ed questioning whether the collection was even real. It's going to get worse before it gets better, Ramona warned. The court hearing for protective custody is scheduled for next week. The estate's lawyers will come at you hard. They'll question your motives, your homelessness, your right to be in that building. You need to be prepared. I'm prepared, Maya said, but her voice shook. The next days were a crash course in surviving public scrutiny. Reporters camped outside Ramona's property. Maya couldn't take her children to school, which they hadn't attended in months anyway, without cameras following them. Online, her entire life was dissected by strangers who'd never lived a day in her circumstances. They found her eviction records, her old employer who'd fired her, a neighbor from years ago who claimed Maya had always been troubled. Every mistake, every failure, every moment of her life when the system had chewed her up and spit her out became evidence that she was unworthy of redemption. But the discovery also brought unexpected allies. Homeless advocacy groups rally behind her, seeing her case as symbolic of society's failures. Legal scholars wrote articles arguing that finder's fees existed precisely for cases like this. And quietly, carefully, some of Prince's most devoted fans began speaking up, saying that if he were alive, he'd have wanted someone desperate and struggling to be helped, not condemned. The court hearing arrived on a Monday morning that felt like walking toward execution. The courthouse was surrounded by media, protesters on both sides holding signs. Some read "Justice for Maya." Others read "Protect Prince's Legacy." Inside, the courtroom was packed. Maya sat at the plaintiff's table with Ramona, her hands folded to hide their shaking. Across the aisle sat 4 lawyers representing various factions of the estate, all of them looking at her like she was dirt they needed to sweep away. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair, called the hearing to order. "This is a petition for emergency protective custody of discovered property. Ms. Chun, your opening statement." Ramona stood, commanding the room with a presence that made Maya believe, for the first time, that they might actually win. "Your Honor, my client discovered a collection of items that had been abandoned in a building that itself has been abandoned for 7 years. She documented her discovery, reported it through proper legal channels, and has not removed or damaged any items. Under Minnesota law, she is entitled to finder's compensation, and the collection itself requires protection from those who might seek to claim it without proper legal authority." The estate's lead attorney, a man whose suit probably cost more than Maya's old car, stood next. "Your Honor, Ms. Richardson was trespassing when she allegedly made this discovery. She has no legal right to enter that property, no right to access secured areas, and her claim of finding an unlocked vault is, frankly, unbelievable. We believe this is an attempt to legitimize theft through legal maneuvering." "I object to the characterization of my client as a thief," Ramona said sharply. "She has taken nothing. She has reported everything. And as for trespassing, she was seeking shelter with her children in an abandoned building. The property owner has not pressed charges because they abandoned that property years ago." The hearing devolved into legal arguments that Maya struggled to follow. Statutes were cited, precedents were argued, the vault's security was questioned, its accessibility analyzed. David, the authentication expert, testified about the collection's value and condition. Claire's photographs were entered into evidence. And then, finally, the judge turned to Maya. "Ms. Richardson, I'd like to hear from you directly. Why should I believe you found this collection rather than gained access to it through theft or deception?" Maya stood, her legs shaking, her voice barely audible. "Your Honor, I broke into that building because it was raining and my children were cold. I wasn't looking for treasure. I was looking for a dry place to sleep." She paused, gathering strength. "When I found the studio, the door was unlocked. When I found the vault, it was open. I don't know why, but I documented everything because I knew people wouldn't believe me. People never believe someone like me." "Someone like you?" the judge asked. "Someone homeless, someone desperate, someone society decided wasn't worth helping." Maya's voice grew stronger. "But I found something valuable, and the law says I deserve compensation for returning it to its rightful owners. I'm not trying to steal from Prince's legacy. I'm trying to give my children a future." The courtroom was silent. The judge studied Maya for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "I'm granting the emergency protective custody petition," the judge finally said. "The collection will be secured by court-appointed guardians, pending authentication and evaluation of all claims. Ms. Richardson's finder's claim will proceed through proper legal channels. As for the trespassing issue, I note that the property owner has not filed charges, and seeking shelter is not the same as criminal intent. This hearing is adjourned." The gavel fell, and Maya collapsed into her chair, shaking with relief and exhaustion. They hadn't won everything, but they hadn't lost. The collection would be protected, her claim would be heard, and she had, for the first time in months, been treated like a person rather than a problem. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed them. Cameras flashed. Questions were shouted. Ramona handled it all, giving a brief statement about justice and proper legal process, while Maya shielded her children from the chaos. That night, back in the safety of the guest apartment, Maya sat with Destiny and Marcus and tried to explain what was happening. "Mama found something that belonged to someone who died. We're going to help give it back to his family. And because we helped, we might get some money." "How much money?" Destiny asked, her 7-year-old mind trying to grasp concepts too large for anyone. "Enough that we'll never have to sleep in the car again. Enough that you can go to school. Enough that Mama can stop being scared all the time." Marcus climbed into her lap, his small body warm against hers. "I'm glad you found the treasure, Mama." "Me too, baby. Me too. But the fight was far from over. Over the next months, the legal battle intensified. Authentication experts spent weeks verifying every item in the collection, comparing serial numbers and provenance against historical records. Some items were confirmed as authentic beyond doubt. Others required additional research. A few were declared questionable, their value uncertain. The estate's lawyers filed motion after motion, challenging Maya's claim from every angle. They argued she'd stolen keys to access the studio. They claimed the vault couldn't have been left unlocked. They brought forward a building employee who said he'd seen Maya breaking in weeks before she claimed to have discovered the collection. Ramona dismantled each argument with evidence, testimony, and a tenacity that reminded Maya why the lawyer had succeeded where others failed. The building employee was proven to have been fired years earlier and couldn't have seen anything. The studio door's lock showed signs of failure, explaining why it had been accessible. And most damaging to the estate's case, their own records showed they'd lost track of the collection years ago, had assumed it was stolen, and had made no effort to search the building they owned. Public opinion shifted slowly but surely in Maya's favor. A documentary filmmaker asked to interview her, wanting to tell the story of a mother who'd stumbled into the discovery of a generation. Music historians began writing about the collection's significance, how these items filled gaps in the understanding of Prince's creative process. And then, 8 months after that rainy night when Maya had sought shelter and found salvation, the court reached a decision. The collection was authenticated at $342 million. Maya's finder's claim was valid under Minnesota law. The estate was ordered to compensate her 10% of the collection's value, $34.2 million, payable within 90 days. $34 million. Maya sat in the courtroom when the verdict was read, unable to process the number. It was too large, too impossible, too far removed from the woman who'd had $17 and 2 starving children months earlier. Ramona's hand found hers under the table, squeezing tight. "You did it," the lawyer whispered. "You won." Outside, the media frenzy was overwhelming. But this time, Maya stood at the microphone Ramona set up and spoke for herself. "I want to thank the court for recognizing that even homeless people deserve justice. I want to thank my lawyer, Ramona Chen, who believed me when no one else would. And I want to say something to everyone who's watching." She paused, looking directly into the cameras. "I didn't find treasure because I was special. I found it because I was desperate enough to look in places other people ignored. There are thousands of families like mine, sleeping in cars and abandoned buildings, just trying to survive. This money will change my life, but it won't change theirs unless we remember that luck isn't a substitute for justice." The questions came fast after that, but Ramona ended the press conference, leading Maya away from the chaos to a car waiting to take them back to the safety of the apartment that was no longer temporary. That night, Maya sat with her children and tried to explain that their lives were about to change in ways she couldn't fully articulate. They would have a house, a real one with rooms and a yard. They would go to good schools with new clothes and backpacks that didn't have holes. They would never go to bed hungry again, never wake up afraid of where they'd sleep, never have to watch their mother cry because she couldn't protect them from the world's cruelty. "Will we have our own rooms?" Destiny asked. "Yes. And toys," Marcus added. "As many as you want." They celebrated with ice cream bought from the corner store, a small luxury that felt enormous because it was chosen freely, not rationed from pennies. Maya watched her children eat and felt something unfamiliar in her chest. Peace. Real, solid, unshakable peace. The money transferred on a Tuesday morning in September, 1 year after Maya had broken into the building that changed her life. $34.2 million, minus Ramona's fees and taxes, left her with $23 million. $23 million. She bought a house first. Nothing ostentatious, but solid and safe in a neighborhood with good schools. For bedrooms, a yard where children could play, and most importantly, a door she could lock knowing no one would make her leave. She enrolled Destiny and Marcus in school, watching them walk into classrooms with other children who'd never known what it meant to sleep in a car. She bought clothes that fit, shoes without holes, backpacks filled with supplies teachers requested. And then, because she understood what it meant to be forgotten, Maya created a foundation. The Purple Hope Foundation, dedicated to helping homeless families find shelter, legal assistance, and paths out of poverty. She donated $5 million to start it, then committed to funding it further as her investments grew. The money was gone, that she'd wake to find herself back in the car with her children shivering beside her. A therapist, recommended by Ramona, helped Maya understand that trauma didn't disappear with financial security. The body remembered hunger even when the stomach was full. The mind remembered fear even when safety was guaranteed. Healing, the therapist explained, was a process that couldn't be rushed by money or victory or even love. Destiny and Marcus adjusted differently than their mother. Children possessed a resilience that allowed them to accept good fortune with less suspicion than adults who'd learned that gifts usually came with strings. Destiny threw herself into school with an intensity that worried Maya at first, until she understood her daughter was trying to prove she deserved this new life through perfect grades and exemplary behavior. Marcus, younger and less scarred by the worst of their homelessness, simply enjoyed being a child. He made friends easily, played soccer in the yard, and asked for toys with the unself-conscious ease of a boy who'd forgotten what it meant to hear no because there wasn't money for yes. But one evening, 6 months after they'd moved into the house, Maya found Destiny crying in her room. "What's wrong, baby? Sarah asked me where we lived before this house," Destiny said between sobs. "I didn't know what to say. If I tell her we lived in a car, she won't want to be my friend anymore." Maya sat on the bed and pulled her daughter close. "Listen to me. What happened to us, living in the car, sleeping in that building, that wasn't shameful. That was survival. And anyone who judges you for surviving isn't someone whose friendship matters. But what if everyone finds out? What if they think we're weird or broken? Then they're wrong." Maya tilted Destiny's face up to meet her eyes. "We're not broken. We're survivors. And that's something to be proud of." The conversation stayed with Maya long after Destiny fell asleep. She realized that her children would carry these experiences into their futures, would be shaped by poverty in ways that wealth couldn't erase. All she could do was teach them that their worth wasn't determined by how much they'd suffered or how much they now possessed. The Purple Hope Foundation became Maya's purpose beyond raising her children. She hired staff, people who'd lived through homelessness themselves and understood the complex barriers that kept families trapped in cycles of poverty. The foundation didn't just provide shelter. It provided legal assistance for families fighting evictions, childcare for parents trying to work, and emergency funds for the small crises that became catastrophes when you had no cushion. Within the first year, the foundation helped 43 families avoid homelessness. By the second year, that number had grown to over 200. Maya visited the families personally when she could, sitting in apartments that reminded her of the one she'd lost, talking to mothers who wore the same exhaustion she remembered seeing in her own mirror. "You made it out," one woman told her, tears streaming down her face. "That means maybe I can too." "You will," Maya promised. "And when you do, you'll help someone else. That's how we break the cycle." But not everyone celebrated Maya's success or the foundation's work. Online, critics accused her of profiting from Prince's death, of stealing from his legacy rather than finding it. A particularly vicious blog post circulated claiming Maya had fabricated her homelessness to gain sympathy, that she'd been a con artist all along who'd planned the discovery. The accusations hurt, even when Ramona advised ignoring them. Maya had lived through every moment of those desperate months. She remembered the weight of her children's hunger, the cold that seeped into bones, the shame of washing in gas station bathrooms. No one could take those memories from her, but they tried to rewrite them into something calculated and false. A documentary filmmaker named Jordan Michaels approached Maya with a different proposition. "Let me tell your real story," Jordan said during their first meeting. "Not the headlines or the gossip, but the truth about homelessness in America, about what you survived, about how the system fails families and how you beat it anyway." Maya was hesitant. Putting her story on screen meant exposing her children to scrutiny, meant reliving trauma for public consumption. But Jordan was persistent and, more importantly, had lived through homelessness herself as a teenager. "People need to see that homelessness isn't a personal failure," Jordan argued. "It's a policy failure. Your story can change how people think about poverty, about whose lives matter, about who deserves help." After weeks of consideration and long conversations with Destiny and Marcus about what being in a documentary would mean, Maya agreed. The filming took 6 months, Jordan's crew documenting Maya's current life while she narrated the events that had led her from stability to streets to salvation. Ramona helped her set up everything: investments that would ensure the money lasted, trusts for the children's futures, and legal protections against those who would try to take advantage of sudden wealth. But it was the quiet moments that mattered most to Maya. The morning she woke up in her own bed without fear. The afternoon she took her children to a park and they played like normal kids. The evening she cooked dinner in her own kitchen and sat at a table that was theirs, would always be theirs, couldn't be taken away. The building that had sheltered her, the Purple Palace that had held secrets and treasure, was eventually sold by the estate. The new owner turned it into a museum dedicated to Prince's legacy, with a special exhibit about the discovered collection. Maya attended the opening ceremony, standing in the studio where she'd found hope. The vault was empty now, its contents distributed to museums and carefully preserved archives. But she could still see it as it had been that morning when she'd opened containers and found impossible wealth. A reporter approached her at the ceremony. "Do you ever regret finding the collection? Your life was simpler before." Maya thought about the question seriously. Her life was complex now, filled with financial advisors and public recognition and people who wanted things from her. But it was also filled with her children's laughter, with security, with the ability to help others who stood where she'd once stood. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret it. That building saved my life, and Prince's legacy, even though he never knew me, gave my children a future. I'll never regret that." She left the ceremony early, driving home through streets that looked different now that she wasn't terrified of them. She parked in her own driveway, walked through her own front door, and found her children doing homework at the kitchen table. "Mama!" Marcus ran to hug her. "We learned about fractions today. And I made a new friend," Destiny added. "Her name is Sarah and she likes drawing too." Maya held them both, breathing in the normalcy of homework and friends and dinners that would be cooked in a kitchen that was warm and safe. She thought about that rainy night, about the decision to break the rules, about finding treasure in abandonment. Sometimes the world broke you down so thoroughly that rebuilding required magic, miracles, or a stumble into the impossible. She got in all three. Outside, the sun set in colors that reminded her of purple, and she smiled. She had been homeless with 2 children. She had been desperate, overlooked, dismissed as worthless by a society that measured value in dollars and deemed her lacking. But she had found Prince's abandoned studio, and in its soundproof vault, she had discovered not just $342 million in treasure, but something far more valuable. She had discovered that she was worth saving, that her children deserved futures, that fighting for yourself wasn't selfish, it was survival. And she had discovered that sometimes, in the ruins of abandoned dreams, new ones could be built. The Purple Palace was gone now, transformed into something public and shared. But its memory lived in every meal she cooked, every bill she paid without fear, every night her children slept safely in their own beds. She had been broken by the world. She had been sleeping in cars and abandoned buildings. But she had found treasure where everyone else saw only decay. And she had won. The years that followed Maya's victory brought transformations she could never have imagined during those desperate months of homelessness. But success, she learned quickly, came with complications that poverty had never prepared her for. The first challenge arrived within weeks of the money transfer. Family members she hadn't heard from in years suddenly remembered her existence. A cousin she'd met once at a funeral called asking for help with medical bills. An uncle she didn't know existed appeared on her doorstep with a business proposal. Her own mother, who'd walked out when Maya was 12, sent a letter through a lawyer requesting a meeting to reconnect. Ramona helped Maya navigate these intrusions with carefully worded responses drafted by the law firm. No was a complete sentence, Ramona reminded her, but delivering that no required legal protection when millions of dollars attracted people who viewed kindness as weakness. The more difficult challenge came from within herself. Maya had spent so long in survival mode, every decision filtered through the lens of scarcity, that abundance felt like a language she didn't speak. She stood in grocery stores, paralyzed by choice, unable to simply buy food without calculating costs she no longer needed to worry about. She woke at night in panic, convinced. The hardest interviews were the ones filmed at the Purple Palace, now a museum. Maya stood in the studio where she'd found the vault and told cameras about that first morning when desperation had driven her to break the rules. She showed them the exact spot where she'd knelt and opened containers that held more money than most people earned in lifetimes. "I wasn't special," Maya told the camera, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly. "I was desperate, and desperation drove me to a place everyone else had written off as worthless. That's the lesson here. We write off people and places because they don't look valuable, but value exists in unexpected places. I was valuable even when I was homeless. My children were valuable even when they were sleeping in a car. We just needed someone to see it." The documentary, titled Purple Hope, How a Homeless Mother Found $342 million, premiered at Sundance Film Festival and won the Audience Award for Documentary Feature. Critics praised its unflinching look at poverty while celebrating Maya's triumph. More importantly, it sparked national conversations about homelessness, about finders' laws, about how society treats its most vulnerable members. The attention brought both opportunities and dangers. Maya received speaking invitations from universities, conferences, and advocacy organizations. She accepted some and declined others, always prioritizing her children's stability over her growing public profile. But the dangers came from people who viewed her wealth as something they deserved to share. A man claiming to be Marcus's father appeared, demanding custody and financial support. DNA testing proved he was lying, but the legal fees to defend against his claim cost Maya $50,000. A woman tried to sue the foundation, claiming Maya's assistance had been discriminatory. The case was dismissed, but not before causing months of stress and negative publicity. "This is the price of being visible," Ramona explained during one of their now regular meetings. "People see money and think it should be theirs. You have to develop thicker skin." But Maya didn't want thicker skin. She wanted to help people without becoming cynical, wanted to maintain the empathy that homelessness had taught her without letting that empathy be weaponized against her. It was a balance she struggled with daily. 3 years after the discovery, Maya received an unexpected letter. It was from Prince's sister, Tyka Nelson, one of the few family members who hadn't fought Maya's claim in court. The letter was handwritten, personal, and surprising in its warmth. "I wanted to reach out personally," Tyka wrote, "to thank you for finding and protecting my brother's work. Many in our family were angry about your finder's fee, but I understood. You were surviving. You found something everyone else had lost. And more than that, you've used the money to help others. That's what my brother would have wanted. He always cared about the overlooked, the struggling, the people society forgot. In some way, he helped you even after death. I think he'd be glad about that." Maya cried when she read the letter. Throughout the legal battle and public scrutiny, she'd worried that Prince's family saw her as a villain, someone who'd profited from tragedy. Knowing that at least one person close to him understood her intentions lifted a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. She framed the letter and hung it in her home office, where she did foundation work late into evenings after her children slept. On hard days, when critics were loud or the work felt overwhelming, she'd read Tyka's words and remember why she fought so hard to keep what she'd found. By the 4th year, the foundation had helped over 800 families avoid or escape homelessness. Maya hired more staff, opened satellite offices in 3 other cities, and began advocating for policy changes at the state level. She testified before legislative committees about the need for more affordable housing, better emergency assistance programs, and legal protections for tenants facing eviction. Politicians weren't always receptive. Some dismissed her as lucky rather than knowledgeable, suggesting that stumbling into wealth didn't qualify her to speak about poverty. But Maya pushed back with facts and lived experience that no amount of policy study could replicate. "I know what it's like to work 2 jobs and still not afford rent," she told one skeptical senator during a committee hearing. "I know what it's like to watch your children go hungry because feeding them meant not paying the utility bill. I know what it's like to be treated as disposable by a system that's supposed to help you. You can dismiss me as lucky, but luck doesn't change the fact that I understand poverty in ways you never will." The senator had no response, and the clip went viral, earning Maya both praise and criticism depending on which side of the political spectrum people occupied. Destiny, now 11, asked Maya one evening why she spent so much time on the foundation when they already had enough money to live comfortably. "Don't you want to just relax? Enjoy being not poor anymore?" Maya considered how to answer. When we were homeless, I used to lie awake at night wondering why no one cared that we were suffering. I'd see people walk past us like we were invisible. I'd ask for help and get treated like I was trying to scam them. And I promised myself that if I ever got the chance, I'd be the person who stopped, who saw, who helped. But you can't help everyone, Mama. No, I can't. But I can help someone. And someone's children get to sleep in beds instead of cars because of that. Someone's mother doesn't have to choose between food and rent. That matters. Destiny was quiet for a moment. When I grow up, I want to help people too. Maya pulled her daughter close, feeling pride swell in her chest. This was the legacy she wanted to leave, not just financial security for her own children, but the understanding that having survived hardship created a responsibility to ease it for others. Marcus, now 8, took a different lesson from their experience. He became obsessed with security, with making sure they'd never lose everything again. He saved every dollar he received from birthday gifts or allowances, hiding money in different spots around his room like a squirrel preparing for winter. When Maya found one of his stashes, she sat him down for a conversation. "Baby, why are you hiding money?" "In case we lose the house." His voice was small, afraid. "Then we'll have something." Maya's heart broke. "Marcus, we're not going to lose the house. We have enough money that we'll never be homeless again." "But you said you had enough money before, and then we were in the car." He was right. She had thought she had enough before the eviction, before the medical bills, before everything fell apart. How could she promise him certainty when life had already proven that certainty was a lie? "You're right," she said finally. "I can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen again. But I can promise that we have so much more protection now than we did before. And if something goes wrong, we have people to help us. We're not alone anymore." It wasn't the reassurance he wanted, but it was the only honest answer she could give. Trauma didn't disappear when circumstances improved. It lingered in hidden money and anxious questions, and the part of a child's mind that couldn't stop preparing for disaster. The 5th anniversary of finding the collection arrived on a cold October evening. Maya stood in her kitchen, cooking dinner while rain drummed against the windows, and thought about how different her life was from that night when she'd broken into the Purple Palace seeking shelter. She owned a home worth $1 million. Her children attended private schools. She ran a foundation with an annual budget of $3 million. She'd been interviewed by major news outlets, had spoken at prestigious conferences, had met with senators and governors, and people whose names she'd only seen in newspapers before. But what struck her most on that anniversary wasn't how much had changed. It was how much remained the same. She was still a single mother, still navigating parenthood without a partner. She still worried about money, though now the worry was about managing it responsibly rather than not having enough. She still remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be treated as less than human because poverty made her inconvenient. That evening, after the children were asleep, Maya returned to the Purple Palace Museum. It was closed to the public, but the director had given her a permanent pass, recognizing that she had a unique relationship to the building. She walked through rooms that had once been refuge and discovery, now transformed into sanitized exhibits with plaques explaining Prince's genius. Tourists visited during the day, taking photos and buying souvenirs, completely unaware that a desperate woman had once slept in these rooms with 2 frightened children. The studio was exactly as she remembered, though cleaned and preserved. The vault door stood open now, empty except for replicas of the items she'd found. The real pieces were in climate-controlled storage, or on loan to museums across the country. Maya stood in the vault and closed her eyes, remembering the moment she'd opened that first container and seen the estimate beneath the purple guitar pick. $250,000, an impossible amount that had somehow multiplied into enough to change everything. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of Prince whose legacy had saved her, to the building that had sheltered her, to the universe or fate or blind luck that had led her here. "Thank you for giving me a chance." She didn't know if dead legends heard gratitude, if buildings remembered the lives lived within them, if the universe cared about single mothers and their children. But she said it anyway, because some things needed to be spoken, even if no one was listening. When she left the museum that night, rain was still falling, just like it had been 5 years earlier. But this time, Maya walked to a car she owned, drove to a home that was hers, and climbed into a bed where safety wasn't a luxury but a given. The documentary had sparked something Maya hadn't anticipated. Other people who'd found valuable items in unexpected places began reaching out, asking for advice about finders' laws and legal rights. A man who discovered original manuscripts in a storage unit he bought at auction. A woman who'd found rare coins in her grandmother's attic. A teenager who'd pulled a painting from a dumpster that turned out to be worth thousands. Maya connected them with Ramona's law firm and began speaking publicly about finders' rights, about the legal framework that protected people who discovered abandoned property. She became an unlikely expert on a niche area of law, giving interviews to legal journals and speaking at law school symposiums. "You've built an entire career out of one desperate night," Ramona observed during one of their meetings. "That's remarkable." "I built a purpose," Maya corrected. "The career is just what it looks like from the outside. But the purpose came with costs she hadn't fully anticipated. The public profile meant privacy became impossible. Photographers occasionally waited outside her children's school. Strangers recognized her in grocery stores and wanted to talk about their own hardships, as if her success meant she had answers to everyone's problems. Some encounters were touching. A young mother approached her in a Target parking lot, tears streaming down her face. "I'm about to be evicted. I have 3 kids. I don't know what to do." Maya had given her the foundation's card and personally followed up to ensure the family received assistance. They'd avoided eviction through emergency rental assistance and legal support fighting an unlawful eviction notice. Other encounters were uncomfortable. A man cornered her outside a restaurant, demanding she give him money since she'd gotten rich off a dead guy. Security had to escort him away while he shouted accusations that made Maya's children cry. "Is this what being famous is like?" Marcus asked afterward, his small hand gripping hers tightly. "This is what being visible is like when people are hurting," Maya answered. "Some people see us as hope. Others see us as targets. We have to be careful about both." The foundation expanded its services to include financial literacy classes for families transitioning out of homelessness. Maya understood from experience that sudden access to resources didn't automatically mean knowing how to manage them. She'd made mistakes in those early months, spending too freely on things that felt important in the moment but were frivolous in hindsight. The classes taught budgeting, but more importantly, they taught people that not knowing how to manage money wasn't a moral failure. Most people never learned financial literacy because they'd never had finances to be literate about. Survival mathematics was different from prosperity planning. Maya taught some of the classes herself, sharing her own mistakes and lessons learned. "I bought my kids a $1,000 playset for the backyard within weeks of getting the money," she admitted to one class. "They played with it for 3 days. The guilt I felt about that purchase taught me that throwing money at problems doesn't solve them. Sometimes kids just need their mom to push them on a regular swing." The students laughed, but Maya saw recognition in their eyes. They understood the impulse to overcompensate, to buy back the childhood's poverty had stolen, to prove through purchases that things were different now. By the 7th year after her discovery, Maya had become a figure in national poverty advocacy. She testified before Congress about the need for increased funding for homeless services. She wrote op-eds for major newspapers about the systemic failures that created homelessness. She partnered with other foundations to create larger impact than any single organization could achieve alone. But success in advocacy meant spending more time away from her children, and guilt gnawed at her when she missed Destiny's school plays or Marcus's soccer games because she was testifying in a state capitol or speaking at a conference. "You're changing laws that will help thousands of kids," Ramona reminded her when Maya expressed this guilt. "That's important work." "But I'm their mother first," Maya said. "I didn't fight to give them a future just so I could be absent from it." She started declining more invitations, setting boundaries around her time, and bringing her children to appropriate events so they could see the work she was doing. Destiny became interested in policy, asking smart questions about legislation and systemic change. Marcus remained more interested in soccer and video games, but he listened when Maya talked about the families the foundation helped. On the 8th anniversary of finding the collection, Maya received news that the Purple Palace Museum was planning a special exhibit about her discovery. The curator called it From Desperation to Preservation, the story of the found collection. "We want to honor your role in saving these pieces," the curator explained. "Without you finding them, they would have eventually been destroyed by water damage or decay. You didn't just find treasure. You preserved history. The exhibit opened 6 months later, featuring photographs of Maya from that time, though she'd insisted they not include the worst images of her homelessness. Her children were old, enough now to understand what they'd survived, but she didn't want them traumatized by seeing their mother's desperation displayed for tourists. The exhibit did include replicas of the vault, interactive displays explaining finders' laws, and a video where Maya talked about the discovery. Standing in the museum at the opening night, surrounded by people who'd come to see not just Prince's legacy but her own, Maya felt something shift inside her. She'd spent years feeling like an imposter, like someone who'd stumbled into luck rather than earning success. But looking at the exhibit, at the tangible evidence of what she'd survived and accomplished, Maya finally accepted what others had been telling her for years. She deserved this, not because she'd suffered, but because she'd survived. Not because she'd been lucky, but because she'd been brave enough to seek shelter in an abandoned building and ethical enough to report what she'd found rather than trying to steal it. Destiny stood beside her, now 14 and growing into the kind of young woman who asked difficult questions and demanded honest answers. "Do you ever wish you hadn't found it?" she asked. "That things were simpler?" Maya considered the question seriously. Life was complicated now in ways it had never been when poverty simplified choices to binary decisions of survival. But complexity meant options, meant her children had futures, meant families stayed housed because she'd had the resources to help them. "No," Maya said finally, "I don't wish that. What I wish is that I'd never had to break into that building in the first place. I wish we lived in a world where single mothers didn't become homeless because they couldn't afford rent and childcare and medical bills. But given that we don't live in that world, I'm grateful I found what I found." Marcus joined them, now 11, and still carrying that anxiety about security that homelessness had carved into his young psyche. But he was also funny and kind and generous with friends who had less, as if he remembered what it felt like to be the kid with nothing. "This is weird," Marcus observed, looking at photographs of their old car on display. "Our life is in a museum." "Part of our life," Maya corrected. "The hard part. But we're more than just the story." "What are we?" Destiny asked. Maya pulled both her children close, looking at the exhibit that told a story of desperation and discovery, of poverty and persistence, of a system that failed and a woman who survived anyway. "We're proof that people are worth more than their worst moments. That struggling doesn't define you. That finding treasure isn't about luck, it's about being willing to look in places everyone else has written off as worthless." She paused, then added, "And we're a family. That's what we are most of all." The years continued, each one adding layers to the story that had started with rain and ended with redemption. The foundation helped thousands more families. Maya's children grew into teenagers with their own dreams and struggles. The documentary won awards and sparked policy changes in 3 states. But on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children were busy with homework or friends, Maya sometimes returned to that memory of standing in the vault, looking at impossible wealth, making a decision that would change everything. She'd been terrified. She'd been desperate. She'd been a mother with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. And she'd won. Not perfectly. Not without scars. Not without ongoing struggles that money couldn't completely solve. But she'd won the right to a future, to safety, to dignity, to the chance to help others find the same. The Purple Palace still stood, transformed from tomb to temple, from abandonment to reverence. And somewhere in its walls, Maya liked to think, the building remembered. Remembered the night a desperate woman had broken its silence. Remembered the children who'd slept on its floors. Remembered that treasure isn't just what's valuable in vaults, but what's precious in the hearts of people fighting to survive. She had been homeless. She had been dismissed. She had been written off by a world that measured worth in dollars and found her lacking. But she had found Prince's abandoned studio, and in its soundproof vault holding $295 million, she had discovered the most valuable treasure of all. The knowledge that she was worth saving, that her children deserved futures, that survival was its own form of courage, and that sometimes, in the places everyone else had abandoned, hope was waiting to be found. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love the story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.